When you let bad guys stay on the street, you shouldn't be surprised when you get more crime. When you defund the police, you shouldn't be surprised when you get more crime. When you pass legislation that ends cash bail, you shouldn't be surprised when you get more crime. And when you do all those things, you shouldn't be surprised that we have, what, a 1,700 police officer shortage in the city. That's what left-wing policies have done. And we got a short video we want to show that shows how it plays out on the street, which you all talked about and all experienced in a personal and firsthand way. So if we can play that video, and then we'll get right to the members' questions.
Chicago's now the carjacking capital of the nation.
Bodies are being littered in the streets of Chicago.
Violent crime continues to plague Chicago. It's not only hurting the people who live there, but also the businesses that call Chicago home.
Deadly gun violence is surging in Chicago once again.
Another night of crime alerts. These attacks are just crazy.
Viciously stabbed in a random attack.
Shots have exploded.
It's like it's the Wild West. I mean, it's very scary.
No one can ever be safe in the city of Chicago.
10 armed robberies within a 30-minute period.
It's not a matter of, if you're going to be hit, but when you're going to be hit.
Unending, senseless, insane violence across the windy city.
The vehicle break-ins in this area have become a near daily occurrence. We've seen an explosion, shootings, and murders. The Democrat-led city seeing a 40% spike with no signs of slowing down.
Park your car, you don't know if it's going to be the night it's going to get broken into again.
Motor vehicle thefts are up in the city 104%.
Crimes are mounting.
19,000 car thefts.
Vehicles left covered in shattered glass.
5-month-old baby was among those killed.
We have yet to hear our mayor say anything, word one, about the criminals running rampant in our street.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from Arizona. Just so you know, if any of you need a break, just let us know. We'll take a break, but we're going to proceed 5-minute questions from each of our members. But like I said, if you need a break, just let us know. We'll be happy to take a break. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's start with you, Officer Yanez. One of the things you said is you called upon enforcement of the laws, and that presupposes that your district attorneys and your prosecution is not enforcing laws. Can you expand on that for a moment?
Sure, I can.
Yes, I can, Chairman. We have criminals, like I said, it's a revolving door. We have individuals that are committing countless acts of crime, violent crimes, and they're just being released, and they're just getting multiple probation sentences. As an officer on the job, we were arresting numerous offenders that were charged with, convicted of murder and released within a 6-7 year period, which was ridiculous. And it's just terrible.
And they reoffend.
And they were arrested for firearms, possession of firearms. So we have a convicted murderer in possession of a firearm.
Thank you. Lieutenant Garrido, the numbers that you were citing are just staggering, and you talked upon it, but I want you to talk about specifically the second guessing that officers undergo because of the hostility, if you will, towards officers who are making decisions in a split second that affect life and death.
It's happening because the way officers are treated, the way that they're treated after an incident occurs. You've got situations where, like I said, officers have to make split-second decisions, and they're immediately scrutinized, they're attacked, they're put on desk duty for supposed to be 90 days. We've had some officers that have been put on desk duty for as much as 2 years. And other officers come in every day to work, and they see that officer sitting there, and they realize, okay, that could be me next. We see other officers that are actually they're threatened with criminal charges, or we see them actually get where they try to fire them.
So that impacts the morale, but that also impacts the safety of the citizens because of the morale.
Well, because it's going to make officers hesitate, right? You're going to have officers that are going to. They don't want to get fired. They don't want to go to jail for maybe possibly an innocent mistake. And when you're having to weigh all that stuff out in a split-second decision, it's tough to do.
Thank you. Mr. Caldwell, you're a native Chicagoan. How do you think these policies have affected the changes you've seen in the safety in the community you grew up in?
Well, I think we just saw it all on tape. And I've heard my voice in that tape multiple times. I got to tell you, when you handcuff the police, what do you expect? Lawlessness. That's what tends to happen. And we've seen our Chicago police handcuff. We've seen them demoralized by previous mayors. And we continue to see that, I believe, under Brandon Johnson. They have a policy called this no chase policy, where officers aren't allowed to chase a suspect in their car without calling into their supervisor, or you can't chase them on foot. Criminals know this. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to take advantage of every opportunity to commit more crime. And the politicians here seemingly don't get it. And it's become problematic for everyone. But as I mentioned before, every community in Chicago has been impacted by this, but especially for a lot of the politicians that run the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago, the folks that they seemingly care a lot about are the black and brown folks who are taking the brunt of the pain, the murders. Things need to change here quickly.
And each of you can comment on this. It's something that all of you have alluded to, and it's the ideological preference over actually providing real safety to the community. And I'll start with you, Mr. Caldwell, and then work on down, please.
Would you repeat your question, please?
Yes. I want you to expand on this notion of how the ideological or political priorities of those who are in political leadership actually undermine ultimately the safety. In other words, they've placed their political ideology over the safety of the community to which they are charged to ensure.
And we've seen the seed of that through the no bail laws. So the cash bail we saw in the First Step Act, not First Step Act, I'm sorry, with the Safety Act, with that initial original bill, second degree murder, non-detainable offense, arson, non-detainable offense. Many offenses you would think, we want to put these folks away for a very long time, non-detainable offense. And it's been a seed that has started across the country. And one, I think, because we haven't really seen much yet, because the implementation of that law just started. But I'm believing, just based on just pure logic and common sense, that this is going to make matters much worse. So where we are in Chicago right now, where you can be downtown Chicago, be robbed, killed, whatever the case may be, we're really entering Gotham City based on the law that just got implemented.
I seen it firsthand under Mayor Lightfoot's administration when she disbanded all the gang and saturation and gun teams. It made a huge impact. You had veteran officers that knew what they were doing, experienced in what they did, and specialized in what they did. They knew the streets. They knew the offenders, because it's always the same offender. You know, the community that I worked in, it's beautiful. Inglewood's beautiful. Most of the criminals don't live in Inglewood. They just travel there. And they're repeat offenders. And it's terrible to see a beautiful community that's affected when you started this community safety team. You had experienced officers that they felt unappreciated. And as we said, the morale just went out the door. So you had experienced officers that just decided to go back because there was too much liability on the officers doing their job. And when you're chasing offenders with guns, you know, things happen bad. And like others have said, you know, you don't want to be put in that position. You don't want your family to be put in that position where you're going to be on callback, or worse, charged criminally, or you're going to lose your job. You know, it's just terrible. And then COPA's, it's terrible what COPA's doing to these officers, proactive officers too, most of them. They're trying to do their job because they love what they do. And like I said, it's not a job, it's a career, a calling. And we see something and you want to react. And it happens in a split second. What happened to us was seconds. And it could have happened differently if there wasn't certain policies and procedures that were put in place.
Thank you so much. My time has long expired. I'm sorry, Mr. Garrido. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Benz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all of you for being here. Mr. Caldwell, I lost a younger brother in an airplane crash. I couldn't talk about it for 3 years. It's been 5 years ago. I have to compliment you on being here, because there becomes a callousness, kind of a feeling that these deaths don't really matter. So without people like you stepping up and explaining the loss, then things don't tend to happen. So I want to thank you again for what it takes for you to be here today.
Thank you.
And perhaps you can share with us what you do to try to bring yourself to talk about this kind of loss.
Well, honestly, when this happened on June 24th, I didn't make it public until the next day. But I was really going to wait until the following week because I didn't want to have to deal with the emotions that come with the folks calling and checking in on you. But I decided to post it on June 25th and make it publicly known because the people who had murdered my brother were still out there. As you all know, I work for Fox News Channel, and it's been a tremendous platform for me, and I thank the people over at Fox News Channel, Suzanne Scott, and many others, who've allowed me to be able to tell my story. And as I begin to tell the story, it really hit me the many people who don't have access to such platforms to be able to get justice for their families, to have their voices known. When my brother was murdered, the newscast that day said 18-year-old murdered, 2 other people shot. That was it. No name, no picture. And how many other people are experiencing that daily if they even get mentioned on the news? I know that the people behind me are overwhelmed. I know that the Chicago police, there's many really good heroes within the Chicago police. I only share my story and I get before cameras because I want to ensure that not just my brother's murder case is solved, but many, many others. So I've been able to utilize the platform in which I have at Fox News to share other stories of families who are looking for that help. That's one of the reasons as I was going through the process of planning my brother's funeral and I saw how expensive it was. And I'm thinking, the folks who live in Chicago, a lot of poor people that live in these particular areas, they're receiving the brunt of the murders. How can they afford this? So it was a mission of mine, and it's one that I'll continue.
Well, thank you so much for that. Mr. Garrido, or excuse me, Lieutenant Garrido, I have a friend who's a retired prosecutor, so I reached out to him in anticipation of today's meeting. I asked him what standards should apply to prosecutors, and he says as about national standards, there aren't many, but that's because each local community is supposed to elect folks who will protect them. And so rather than have a national standard, that's the approach he mentioned. That said, he goes on to say, the people of Chicago have no less interest in being safe from random shootings, gang violence, and rampant drug dealing than any other part of America. And then he says this, what is particularly risible about Kim Foxx is that she's looked primarily to the criminal defense attorneys and advocates for criminals known as the woke community, or known in the woke community as the criminal justice affected community, not victim groups, not police or law enforcement organizations. For example, Fox, as well as approximately 3 dozen Soros DAs out of the 2,500 elected DAs in the United States, do not participate in the National DA Association, by far the largest prosecutor organization, which has been around since 1950. And that organization, to which they don't apparently belong, has avoided taking partisan political positions. She and other Soros DAs have coalesced around a much smaller group called the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, which has few members nationwide, and unlike the NDAA, has taken very partisan political positions. My question to you is, after all that, is it true that they're taking political positions as opposed to those which are going to help more adequately control crime? Absolutely. Please explain them.
Absolutely. Just like I said before about her changing the threshold for felony theft from 500 to 1,000, she has a lot of leeway to decide what they're going to charge and what they're not going to charge. Or when we present homicide cases or any case for felony approval, they put a lot of restrictions and to just create these long lists of things that we have to do to try to hoops that we have to jump through, and they make it difficult. If I could, a sentence from a letter that one of the state's attorneys, a top-ranking state's attorney, left. He said, The state's attorney voiced her concern with a headline and the heat she was getting over her backers and never voiced any concern over the fact that this woman was shot and killed simply for walking to the store, and nobody's going to face a murder charge. That is what is wrong with this administration. This administration is more concerned with political narratives and agendas than with victims and prosecuting violent crime. This is why I can't stay any longer. This is one of several public letters that were put out by state's attorneys as they're leaving. It's 100% based on political ideology and not seeking justice for victims in Chicago.
Thank you so much. My time's up. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Lieutenant Garrido, I'd like to start with you and return to the subject of bail reform and appropriate bail procedures. I had the privilege of serving my community as a federal prosecutor and later as a judge, so I understand what a critical part of the criminal process that is and how much it affects overall community safety. Will you elaborate for us, please, on the effect it is having on the law enforcement officers' ability to do their job when prosecutors don't seek detention hearings and judges are prohibited from considering community safety and likelihood of recidivism as factors in making appropriate bail determinations?
Well, it's just another nail in the coffin where we repeatedly see different things that embolden the bad guys and make these criminals feel that they're not going to be held accountable. So why should they care? They're not worried about getting arrested because they know they're going to be out right away. We oftentimes would joke just because for years our criminal justice system in Chicago here and Cook County has been in such shambles that most of these offenders, they'll get off on technicalities or whatnot, but at least sometimes they would spend time in jail while waiting for their trial, so they would get at least some time served. Now that's out the window. So you've got the bad guys are just learning, and they're quickly learning because this stuff is broadcast everywhere, that they don't have to worry about any consequences. So it makes it extremely difficult for officers to do their job because you're now dealing with people that are even more combative than they normally would be.
You also touched on the subject of juvenile offenders. In your experience, tell me about some of the juvenile offenders you see. Is it important for prior juvenile offenses to be considered in the totality of the seriousness of a criminal's behavior and in future prosecution and sentencing or detention decisions?
Absolutely. We've seen time and again the gangbangers are actually using, they've done it for years. They always use the younger kids. They would use them to do their burglaries. They use them to hold their weapons. They use them to hold their drugs because they know that they're just going to get a slap on the wrist. So that's always been the case. But now it seems as though these young offenders are getting more dangerous, quite honestly. They're now shooting at people. They're now stealing cars and doing carjackings. Like I said, just the other day, the offenders were 4 of them, and they were ages 12 to 16. So we've got our juvenile criminal offenders, at least here in Chicago, are becoming more and more violent. So absolutely, that stuff should be considered.
Officer Yanez, you touched on the dismantling of the gang and gun specialized units. Would you elaborate for us, please, on why those units were established, why they're important, and why it is affecting the efficacy of your work not to have them anymore?
So I worked 7 District TAC for 4+ years, 4.5 years. And as John Garrido said, you have to learn your technique. Everyone learns their profession in a certain field, and you have officers that had experienced numerous years over the years of working with certain individuals, whether it be gang members, gun offenders, narcotics, and just being able to deal with it when it comes to saturation. But the units that were established were for basically common sense what they were named. The gangs were for officers that had prior knowledge with certain gang members or leaders, and they knew when a gang shooting happened and occurred where the retaliation would be, so we can focus on that area. As far as the gun teams, you know, they specialized in retrieving guns from offenders, gun offenders. Saturation was basically you saturated an area where there was going to be, where we had knowledge of like gang shooting, we would saturate that area so there wasn't a retaliation. But when you dismantle that and you take away some of the perks, so they work 10-hour days as one of the perks, you have officers that have to be on the job, and you're arresting individuals, and then you have officers that are, that takes a process. You're arresting them, so it could take up to several hours to process on a criminal offender being charged with a weapon. So you also increase the overtime pay, so it's just, yeah.
And Lieutenant Garrido, I'd like to also touch on the subject of officer discipline and the concept that officers are confronted with anonymous complaints against them and denied an opportunity to understand the allegations or confront the witnesses that might be making allegations against them. Would you share with us what is going on in that regard and how it is affecting officer morale?
Yeah. It's a huge impact on morale. Just to give an example, we have officers that the complaint will come in, it's an anonymous complaint, the investigation will go on, and these investigations sometimes take 2, 3, 4 years. It's incredible. I had one investigation for us that was 9 years in the making. So these officers are going to work every day. They don't know when the next shoe is going to drop. They don't know where this investigation is going to go. They don't know if they're going to somehow be criminally prosecuted as well. It's demoralizing for the officers, and if you can imagine that officer that's sitting there on roll call every day, it's affecting his partners and other officers because they also know that he's going through it, and some of them are going through it as well. These investigations just go on and on and on because I don't know what the reason is. They're short-staffed, they're not conducting the proper investigations, whatever it is. And then allowing these anonymous complaints, people learn quick. Just complain against the police. You just put in a complaint. They lie a lot. I mean, there are a ton of these investigations are false allegations, and at least when you had to make them sign an affidavit, at least that helped reduce it a little bit. But by eliminating that, now anybody and everybody is making complaints against the officers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Lieutenant, Mr. Caldwell mentioned earlier a no chase policy. Is that the policy with the police department now?
So we've always had a vehicle chase policy, and it's a balancing test. Yeah. And you have to weigh things out, safety of the public.
But a foot chase as well?
They've added a lot. Well, they've added a lot of restrictions and things that make it difficult to actually conduct a chase. Well, now they just recently added, the end of last year, a foot chase policy, which also includes a balancing test. So if you walk up to a corner, you get a call of somebody selling drugs on the corner, and they match the description that was given, and they take off running. That alone is not enough. You are not supposed to chase those offenders or those subjects. And the interesting thing about it, as far as how things are so politicized, criminals are generally stupid. So it took them years to figure out that our vehicle chase policy is restrictive. Well, Lightfoot and Brown couldn't wait to get out there and broadcast that we have a foot chase policy. So what happens, we end up with videos of people yelling at the officers that are conducting foot chases, yelling at them that they can't chase.
Wow. Can't chase him. And then if you do catch the bad guy, you get an anonymous complaint, and you get a prosecutor who won't prosecute him. I mean, such a deal. And you wonder, again, I think one of the key elements here is the damage to morale. The fact that you were that many officers, 1,700 officers short, I think is scary. It's not my